All right, it is just about 12 o'clock here. So, Miigwech, merci beaucoup. Thank you for joining us for our Lunchtime Health Sciences webinar today entitled Community Engagement, Wise Practices. And this webinar is going to be delivered by Yolanda Wanakamik, who is our Director of Indigenous Affairs here at NOSM. I'm Dr. Mike Ravenick, the Manager of the Health Sciences Programs. And before we get started, I'm just going to do some quick welcomes and introductions. Here's a quick agenda for us. So after those welcomes and introductions, we'll get into the content of the webinar, and we will leave about 10 minutes at the end if you do have any questions. So certainly if you have questions, you can wait until the end, or you can put them into the chat box, and I will keep track of them for the question and answer period at the end. Just a reminder about your camera and microphone being off for the duration of the webinar. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be posted to YouTube within 2 to 3 weeks after the webinar. All of our previous webinars are now already on YouTube, and you can find those links to the recordings on our Rehabilitation Sciences and NODIP websites in the resources sections, or you can go directly to the NOSM TV channel on YouTube. So before we introduce our speaker today, we'll do a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the entirety of NOSM's wider campus of Northern Ontario is the ancestral traditional lands of the First Nations people and Métis people who resided alongside. We also respectfully acknowledge that the medical school building at the Laurentian University is located in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, and at Lakehead University and the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory. So today's speaker is Yolanda Wanakamik, and as I mentioned, Yolanda is NOSM's new Director of Indigenous Affairs, well, newer, now having been with the school since October of last year, and we're very lucky to have Yolanda with the school. Yolanda is a member of White Sand First Nation, located in the traditional territory of the Robinson Superior Treaty. She is passionate about health, education, and community, and she brings a vast array of knowledge and skills that will support growth and positive organizational culture at NOSM. She holds an honors Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a Master of Education in Educational Studies. A committed lifelong learner, Yolanda has dedicated herself to the advancement of learners at all levels of education, and notably she held several positions at Lakehead University in the Office of Indigenous Initiatives, from recruitment, retention to senior leadership. Yolanda has a diverse background in areas of governance, policy, politics, and has served as her First Nation band counselor. The many years spent in Northern Ontario have laid the foundation for a profound interest in the North and the challenges and rewards faced by communities. Yolanda is a visionary leader committed to principles of supporting capacity and community development as keys to improving education outcomes, and recognizes and supports the strengths and aspirations of community stakeholders. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Miigwech, Yolanda, for your time today. I know you're very busy, so we really appreciate you providing a webinar for us today. And so now I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And as I mentioned, as I share my screen with everybody, I won't be able to see all of you. So if there are questions, Mike, I appreciate the support in you taking that role on here. So let's.
Okay. There we go.
Very good. Okay. So again, bonjour, miigwech to Health Sciences, and Mike in particular for the invitation to speak to you today about community engagement. As a member of a First Nation and someone who's worked with and in community, as well as somebody who's engaged in community engagement, this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So today I'm going to go over my positionality and sort of where I come from. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Indigenous Affairs Unit. I'm going to review the 4 R's, talk a little bit about community engagement, I'm going to share some experiences and some tips moving forward, and I hopefully will leave time for some Q&A. I've actually got my timer on, so hopefully I don't alarm anybody too loudly when it goes off to alert me, because I'm a bit long-winded, as many people know. So again, my name is Yolanda Wanakamik, and I'm a member of the White Sand First Nation, which is located 50 kilometers away. I was born and raised in a small little hamlet called Armstrong Station, and I lived there until high school when I had to move to Thunder Bay to go to attend high school. I'm the daughter of Dawn and Annette, the sister to Austin, granddaughter to Josephine, the mother to Lucas and Isaac, and wife to Jason. Today I'm talking to you from Thunder Bay, and I live in the city of Thunder Bay. My office is located at both the Lakehead University NOSM campus as well as Fort William First Nation. Mike did a bit of an acknowledgement already, but acknowledging the territory in which we live and work is vitally important. It's important to raise awareness of Indigenous presence and land rights in everyday life. As a non-Indigenous person, it's important to acknowledge the land as a visitor, and to acknowledge the colonial history and current history in Canada. It's also important to acknowledge and complement self-reflection as well. With that said, I'm acknowledging that NOSM has two campuses, of course, situated on the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation, Atikameksheng, and Wanakamik First Nations. Ontario has more than 40 treaties. NOSM is situated in 6 of those treaty areas in Northern Ontario. I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge the Métis peoples of Ontario, which we are situated within 9 regions and 32 communities here. I humbly ask that wherever you are calling in from today and situated, to think about those areas that you work and reside in. I'm grateful for today and every day as I walk along my path, that I'm guided by my elders, community, and family members. Like no other time in life do we recognize the importance and the simplicity of life's gifts that we have all been given. I'm grateful for the medicine of the land, the water, fresh air, and the good health I have, especially during this pandemic. So I began working at NOSM in the fall of 2020, coming from Daliko Anishinaabeg Family Care Health Services as their Integrated Policy Officer. Previous to this, I was at Lakehead University Indigenous Initiatives as the Indigenous Recruitment Officer, Graduate Studies Coordinator, and Acting Vice Provost of Indigenous Initiatives. Education is my passion. Reducing barriers, creating meaningful change for Indigenous peoples is my vision. The opportunities at NOSM are great. We have an excellent opportunity to create the next generation of physicians working across Northern Ontario and allied health professionals for improved health outcomes of Indigenous peoples. In community engagement, it is always appropriate to introduce yourself in a meaningful way. This means going beyond the surface and really thinking about who you are as an individual in the work that you're going to engage. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our office and some of the work that we are engaged in currently. And 1 hour is certainly not enough time to talk about all of community engagement and all that is involved in it. But I wanted to hit on some of the areas that were important and perhaps relevant to you in your work. So just a little bit about the Indigenous Affairs Unit. We're situated in the newly formed Equity and Inclusion Portfolio. In July 2020, NOSM appointed the first Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion, Joseph LeBlanc. Joseph is a member of the Wanakamik unceded territory. The EI mandate is to promote equity, increase diversity, and strengthen the culture of inclusion among the school's faculty, staff, learners, alumni, and friends in collaboration with community and academic partners. The portfolio includes Indigenous affairs, Francophone affairs, and learner affairs. And in Indigenous affairs, we support learners, staff, and faculty from application to graduation and workforce entry. And we are very focused on community engagement. Much of the work we do is community engagement on behalf of the school to bridge opportunities from recruitment to medical education to practice. Currently, our unit is comprised of 6 staff members. me being the director, my primary role is to be a liaison between NOSM and Indigenous groups, communities, and stakeholders, and to provide leadership in matters related to Indigenous learners and facilitate resources as well as cultural and community supports for staff and learners. And I certainly can't do this on my own. I do it with the work of the community coordinator, who's primarily responsible for building and maintaining relationships with community and partner organizations for NOSM's placements, and works closely with our local community coordinators who are situated within 42 First Nation communities across Northern Ontario. The cultural coordinator is primarily responsible for building and maintaining relationships, working with knowledge keepers and connecting learners, staff, and faculty with cultural experts. Most recently, we have 2 new positions in the unit. There is a learner coordinator, learner recruitment and support coordinator who will work closely with admissions and learner recruitment and will be responsible for learner recruitment and retentions at various levels. And we hope to start at grade 7 and 8 and engaging our communities across Northern Ontario to become involved in NOSM's recruitment strategies and initiatives. We also have a unit coordinator who's responsible for performing higher level administrative duties and managing the many projects that our office is responsible for. So when engaging with Indigenous communities, I always like to refer to the 4 agreements. And these are respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. No matter the situation that you find yourself in, developing a relationship is important, and this takes time and energy and intention. Thinking about the friendships that you have in your own personal and professional lives, how long did it take you to establish those relationships? How do you maintain those relationships? Are you still connected with those people? What is involved in that? So reflecting back on some of those ideas when we're engaging in community, whether it's with individuals or community groups or organizations as such, those are some questions that you could be reflecting on. Community engagement seeks to better engage the community to achieve long-term and sustainable outcome processes, relationships, discourse, decision-making, or implementation. So just to review what those 4 R's sort of mean for me and potentially can mean for you, and perhaps it is how you are guided by your work day to day now. Respect by definition can mean to demonstrate high regard for or pay special attention to something or someone that you value. It can mean to feel positively towards others because they affect you positively. You may have a respect for a person who treats you kindly, or you see that they are working hard to achieve something, to overcome a challenge. Being respectful is about using kind words, sharing and accepting differences of one another. I like to say oftentimes it is okay to agree to disagree. Incidentally, NOSM launched the Respect campaign, which you can see throughout the PowerPoint, which aims to emphasize actionable change in policy and foster a culture of kindness, respect, inclusivity, and diversity. Respectful relationships are grounded in the recognition of interconnectedness of all living things when we're working together. Relevance ensures what you're doing is relevant when you're working with others. You have to ask yourself why this work is important to you and have to know why that is. And why would it be important to an Indigenous community member or individual you might be working with? How can they be involved in this work? And it should be centers around meaning and ongoing long-term engagement, just as a relationship does. Responsibility honors the integrity of the group you're working with. Understand your power in the relationship and why you are here and doing this work. As a practitioner in the community, as a community member, understanding your positionality is truly important to Indigenous peoples and to the community. And you have to be inclusive of the whole community, meaning the family members, the community organizations and supports that might be involved in a family's life. Reciprocity, sharing knowledge throughout the process means the learning is two-way. It's a shared responsibility. It is about being the student and the teacher at the same time. As you can see, the Indigenous holistic framework above illustrates Indigenous values and ways of being and the direct relationship and connection between academic programs and student services and supporting student initiatives. In 1991, Kirkness and Barnhart came out with the 4Rs, which allowed us to first provide post-secondary institutions with the 4Rs to support Indigenous learners. Again, respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. The graphic that's in the PowerPoint here illustrates the work of Michelle Pigeon of SFU in British Columbia. This framework is not meant to be a model that treats all Indigenous peoples as the same, but a model to show how the diversity of Indigenous understandings of place, language, and cultures relates to the individual, faculty, and community, both institutional Indigenous communities within and outside of the institution. I often like to refer to First Nations mental health wellness continuum when I'm talking about in community engagement. And the continuum is referenced at the end of my presentation. So if you'd like to learn more about it, you can definitely check out the reference. But I'd just like to quote from the framework. Mental wellness is a balance of the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. This balance is enriched as individuals have purpose in their daily lives, whether it's through education, employment, caregiving activities, or cultural ways of being, and hope are in doing. Hope for the future and those of their families that is grounded in the sense of identity, unique Indigenous values, and having a belief in spirit, a sense of belonging and connectedness with their families, to community, and to culture, and finally a sense of meaning and an understanding of how their lives and those of their families and communities are part of the rich history. Sorry, I'm moving back. So I just wanted to sort of share some of my my experiences in community engagement, and one of those experiences was being my First Nation, White Sand First Nations Health Director 25 years ago. And I often reflect on that as a great, unique learning experience for me as an Indigenous community member, being engaged by external partners who really wanted to sort of come in and bring their projects and their ideas and their work to the community because they really felt that it was important work, it was necessary work, and oftentimes, you know, they sort of came in hard and strong and fast. And it was very challenging being a community member in a First Nation, knowing what you know about your community and what its capacity is, what the interest might be for this, what the financial resources, human resources would be for different projects and such. And so that was always a challenge because it's not that, you know, I as an individual director or community member didn't feel like these ideas were really, really important. They certainly were, because many of them were health related and improving health outcomes. But knowing what you know in a community and what is being presented to you are not always necessarily aligned at the same time. So I really did appreciate those who came in, who came to introduce themselves as I have sort of introduced myself to you today, getting to understand why this was so important from their perspective, understanding what they bring to the table, what their timelines were. All of those types of things are really, really critical when you are engaging with Indigenous partners and community members. Our office is responsible for several projects and engagement opportunities, from curriculum to programming to student services to services that would support faculty members. And again, you have to sort of come in with an open mind and an open heart and having those conversations about what it is that you want to have and see done. A project that I was involved with at Delico was a palliative care for vulnerable and underserved populations. It was a needs assessment that was commissioned by the local health integration network here in Thunder Bay. And that was a really excellent opportunity for me to sit on the other side of the table and to be the person who had to reach out to all of the communities. And thank goodness I am from one of the communities that we reached out to, but it also really humbled me in my outreach to everybody else, because just as I'm saying to you, it's really important to introduce who you are and your interest in the work that you're doing. This project was also very near and dear to my heart. So I actually spent a significant amount of time, probably more time than I should have, based on the funding model and the project timeline, introducing myself and building relationships with the individuals that I was connected to. And I definitely reached out to people that I knew within the organizations and the groups that we were hoping to talk to. That was something that was really, really important. And it was also really important in this project as well to include individuals who were living vulnerably and also were living homeless. So they were brought into the fold and helped to support the direction of the project, which was really, really important. Work. And at NOSM, we have several projects that our office are solely responsible for, but we also have lots of projects where we're aligned with other units here at NOSM. And some of the challenges, I think, are timelines for a lot of these projects, because, you know, as everything rolls, there's always a date and timeline and a budget for it. So those are some of the challenges that we face in that. We're currently looking to develop the Indigenous health practitioner pathway, and you may have saw or heard some of the news announcements about this. And this is a really excellent project that is going to pave the way, if you will, for some opportunities to develop a strong, robust program in terms of engaging Indigenous peoples to become physicians, to partake in health sciences, and also to potentially be a part of the postgraduate program here as well. But it's all about supporting those individuals along the way. So as you can well imagine, the engagement for a project like this is quite large. So lots of conversations having to occur in lots of places, not just only with NOSM, but we will have community engagement as well, where we're going out to talk to individual First Nations, political territorial organizations, and also community organizations about what their needs are and what it is that we can do to help support the population, to increase Indigenous physicians and allied healthcare practitioners in Northern Ontario. We also have cultural spaces on campus, and I just wanted to sort of note that at both Laurentian and Lakehead, we have student spaces that are specifically for them. It's also for staff and faculty as well, but it's really great to have that space designated out for people to come together, to converse, to talk. So those are spaces available. And in terms of curriculum development, recently NOSM has a new committee, which NOSM has many committees, and this committee is the Academic Indigenous Health Education Committee. So it is a committee of Indigenous staff and faculty, learners, community organizations, where we get to talk a little bit about how you know, things like traditional medicine can be potentially explored as a curriculum option at NOSM, and how do we develop and evolve that. So again, lots of conversations with individuals to develop this work here at NOSM. And some of you may be familiar with the Remote First Nation Residency Stream. That actually is a stream of that has been established through the Matawa Health Co-op, Ibamatong First Nation, and the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. So in that process, there were significant community engagement opportunities. And as always, those opportunities present really great, rich conversations, but also present some big struggles as well in terms of positionality. So what does the medical school want? What does the health co-op want? And what does the First Nation want? And what do community members want? So it's all about sort of trying to navigate those conversations in a good way. Being open, honest, and transparent about those conversations is really important. And as I said earlier, sometimes we have to agree to disagree on certain areas that aren't going to work, but we have to be really open about those kinds of conversations. And I've also just listed CEPD, continuing education and professional development as well. The office is significantly engaged in cultural safety training at NOSM. And I think that is an area that I think everybody should do some directed learning, whether it's self-learning or participating in groups like the Ontario Indigenous Cultural Safety Initiative, to understand, and again, I go back to the very beginning, understanding your positionality, understanding who you are in this work, who you are as an individual, as a professional, who you are as a Canadian in this country, an Ontarian in this country, and then the relationship to Indigenous peoples is really, really important to understand as well. It's not just enough to understand, the community's culture as much as it is to understand the colonial experience that Indigenous peoples have faced in Ontario and Canada. So moving right along, I'm trucking quite well here. Okay. So moving forward, I think that Indigenous community engagement means to understand and respect the diversity of the cultures that we have within First Nations communities, within Métis communities, within Inuit communities. I think that, often people will say to me, what do I call you? How do I reference you? And when I was a young girl, I didn't know anything other than, I was an Indian. That's what I knew. And a few things happened in the country and there were some changes. And by the time I got to high school, people said, what do I call you? I said, I don't know. I'm heard I'm Native now. That's what everybody's using. So then I became Native. And then, a few more years go by and there was some changes to the Constitution, and now I'm Aboriginal, so you call me Aboriginal. And now it's going back to the language. Today I'm known as Anishinaabe Kwe. That's who I am, and that is a name that I would say that I have come to own myself from my community. It's not the government and others saying who I am. And then there's a whole diversity of culture within the groups. So I'm Anishinaabe, but there could be Potawatomi, there could be Cherokee. There are many, many groups, and understanding the difference between the groups is really, really important. So not thinking about individuals as one group, but as a many, many groups, distinct to each other. Thinking about why you're engaging in community, why is it important? What is it that you hope to do? And it's all about, again, building good relationships. So, I can only bring it back to the most simplest form of when you're meeting a friend for the very first time. What does that relationship look like, and what could that potentially look like in your own personal relationships with Indigenous peoples, but also in your working relationship with them? How to establish trust. Trust doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that takes time and energy, and like I said, good intentions as well. So some of the suggestions that I put forth, and by no means are they whole and in their entirety, but some of the suggestions I'm putting forth are just understanding the historical and the current context. Oftentimes people will say our, colonial history is over, it's done, we're done with that, we've recognized it and we're moving on. But really, if we start to dig down deep into, the Indian Act is the only race-based piece of legislation in the world, and if anybody wanted to take it to task, you could. It is still a piece of legislation that governs Indigenous peoples in this country, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Engaging people on a nation-to-nation basis. I think that that's another really sort of important consideration, understanding that, there's a lot of language in the Indigenous community about political territorial organizations, healthcare organizations and such, First Nations and their leadership. You have to sort of be thinking and being mindful of who it is that you're engaging with in the conversation, and if it is the most appropriate person to be engaging in the work that you hope to do. And I think you should always be thinking about mutual benefit. So what is the benefit for you, but what is the benefit for them? That reciprocity in that relationship is really, really important. Building good relationships, I can't state that enough. You know, it's really, really important to come to the table not with your proposition on the very first time out or your very first meeting. It's good to build a bit of a foundation, get to know who the person is, allow them to know who you are, and then you can start working together to see what some of those synergies are that might exist between the two of you. Something in my community that is said a lot is nothing with us without us. So if you're thinking about project work, developing programs or services, it's a good idea to engage early, which is point number 7. So talking to people. So if you have an idea or a thought about what it is that you want to be working on or working in, it's good to talk to people first before you start to really develop the ideas. There's nothing worse than sitting at the table and having a full idea flushed out on your behalf without you having said anything about what you think about it. And again, good engagement focuses on relationship building. And engagement is not outcome based. So just because you engage Indigenous communities doesn't mean that that's the final result, that we've engaged them, they don't want to move on with us, so we're just going to forge ahead. That is something that's, I would suggest, is a significant no-no in our community. And community engagement is a must. So I think that is something important to think about when you're doing your work, and as is being transparent. So something really, really important is just to sort of lay all the foundations on the table. I mean, if you have a project, say, that has a strict timeline and you have very limited budget, it's really important to put that out so that the hopes and expectations aren't going to be greater than what it is that you might be able to provide in that relationship. So really, really important to be transparent, and just transparent about how you're working towards that as well is really important. So these are just some of my references here, and sort of zip through that fairly quickly. And I say that I love community engagement. This is sort of my this is my jam. It's what I am most happy doing when we are in community, talking with people, finding out what some of those synergies and opportunities are that might exist. One of the things that being in post-secondary education over the last 10 years of my life, been recognizing what it is that might be possible within institutions and organizations and companies and businesses as such that can help to foster positive working relationships with our communities. And in particular, I think about learners and ensuring that they're successful when they come in the door. So they're met at the door with, a very positive, happy, forward-thinking attitude when they get here, and supporting them all through the process when they are here, and ensuring that there's a successful transition to whatever it is that they hope to do when they're done and graduating with us. I think that that is the gift of being able to work in an institution, in a position, and in a role such as mine. It's sort of seeing, oftentimes, you work for organizations and such, and you can't see what might be possible until you sort of learn and understand the system. And I've only been here for a very short period of time up to this end, but I can see the openings and I can see the opportunities, and I definitely can see the willingness of the medical school to work towards some of these desired goals of communities who have asked for, things like better admissions processes, and ask for, being able to see themselves in the curriculum, and having those learners in the classroom feeling culturally safe when they're in the classroom. So there's some really great opportunities to do some really meaningful work here moving forward. One of my most favorite authors of all time is Richard Wanakamik. And Richard Wanakamik is from Wabsamung First Nation, which is white dog for many of you who would maybe perhaps recognize that name. And he was a prolific author, Indigenous author, who wrote many, many books that are super easily accessible. And one book that he wrote in particular that really touched my life, and it is a book that I often share with many people who say, how do I better understand the experience of Indigenous peoples in Canada? And this book is called Indian Horse. And I'm just going to leave with a little bit of a quote, and then I'm going to leave the floor open for some questions, and hopefully you have some, because we've got some time left for that. I do much better with a Q&A, and I can really sort of expand on some ideas. Quote goes like this: "All that we are is story. From the moment we are born to the time we continue on our spirit journey, we are involved in the creation of the story of our time here. It is what we arrive with. It is all we leave behind. We are story, all of us. What comes to matter then is the creation of the best possible story we can while we're here. You, me, us together. We can do that when we can do that, and we can take that time to share those stories with each other. We get bigger inside. We see each other. We recognize our kinship. We change the world one story at a time." Thank you.
Miigwech, thank you, Yolanda. That was a beautiful quote and a really nice way to cap off your talk. And I guess I'll start with the questions. And, thank you again for sharing your knowledge and sharing your time with us today. I really love the 10 suggestions that you provided. They're very applicable. You can see how easily you can transfer them to really any situation, and yet at the same time they really embody the 4 R's as well. And really the 10 steps or the 10 suggestions that you had were emphasized that community engagement isn't something that happens right away. It takes time to build that, and that engagement in and of itself is not the outcome. I think that's also very important to emphasize. So my first question, and I'll get us started, but everyone else, please certainly feel free to put questions in the chat or take yourself off mute. But obviously, community engagement can experience snags, right, from time to time, and the suggestions that you provided were great in terms of when things go well, this is how it should go. But do you have any recommendations for what people might do when they do run into difficulties with that engagement process?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that, one of the 7 sacred teachings is humility, right? So it's sort of finding, really sort of sitting back to reflect on how things have gone bad. So understanding that, and again, I'll go back to even the discussion of reciprocity. So if you've sort of misstepped or said things that were inappropriate, and somebody is telling you that that's not right, or they don't like what's happening here, or that they feel like there are, I don't even know, I'm going to just use an example, underlying, asks that haven't been put forward, those types of things. I think that it's really, really important to just be humble and admit that, yeah, you didn't know, and you maybe have spoken out of turn, or you've said things in sort of a wrong, lighter way. And often, when I'm approached as an individual who maybe perhaps is supporting or mentoring somebody through their work, it would be to learn more about what it is that you've done, right? So it's like that self-reflexive piece. I think that oftentimes in our community, it's, the responsibility is on the other individual, the person sitting across the table from you, to take on that learning, when really, if you're misstepping and you're missaying, things, or not understanding the situation, it's because of that. You just don't understand the situation and the context. And I think in terms of Canada, we do not do a good job in the education system, the K through 12, and understanding the colonial history in Canada and why perhaps the apprehension. Let's even just talk currently here in terms of the vaccination through this pandemic, and the apprehension of Indigenous community members who don't want to partake in that because of their experience with the healthcare system. And, for us here at NOSM, we had an overwhelming response to go north to help out with Operation Remote Immunity, which is a vaccination program where teams have gone out to First Nation communities directly. And there was a significant amount of training involved in cultural competency, if you will, or cultural safety training that was delivered on top of everything that, each individual, say from NOSM, if they were a NOSM learner, they have been through many of these programs. And if you're coming from elsewhere, there was some sort of preliminary training. And some of that training did include the history of the medical care system in northern communities and the research that was conducted with Indigenous community members and communities and schools, residential schools as well. So that's part of the rationalization. And in terms of residential schools in this country, especially with our northern remote communities here in northern Ontario, oftentimes families back in the day were terrified of little airplanes flying in and out of their communities because they were coming to take their children. So those are some of the apprehensions. So when people are reluctant, and although in our circles and in our areas, we might think, oh, geez, why isn't everybody just getting vaccinated? It's going to save my life. It's going to save their life, the life of their family members. But I think that even just that simple understanding of the history in Canada as to what has gone on is really, really important to understanding the context. And perhaps you wouldn't be so quick to judge that if you knew that history and understood it. And again, I say, the education system in our country has some great responsibilities. I've just recently graduated from the Masters of Education program here, and I'm almost 50 years old. And it was amazing to sit among my peers in my cohort and to watch them for the very first time ever hear about what a residential school is. It blows my mind that we still have, people who are 20 and 30 years old who don't understand and don't even know. Right. And then we have the media. The media takes over and says what they have to say and do what they do. And it's atrocious because, we all tend to believe whatever news feed we've got coming in. And there's so much more that's involved in that. So to your point about, what is it that you can do? Self-education is really, really important. For myself as a younger individual, I used to always be the person that was pounding my fist on the table in my high school classroom to say, I am not what you say I am. I'm a good person. I go to school. I have a job. I pay taxes. I do all of those things. And I would try to educate people. But really, it was all for naught when I was a young girl because they need to educate. You need to educate yourself about the history. The education system should be doing something for us as well. And I think it is getting better. But we definitely have a long ways to go in terms of this. And then understanding what's kind of cool at NOSM is we have a new inclusion portfolio, which really will help, I think, us as a school in Northern Ontario respond to the systemic, deeply embedded ideas about what diversity, inclusion, unity looks like. I think it's something that we don't often dig deep enough. And even just in my own personal learning journey, I'm understanding what my own biases are amongst other groups as well. So I think it's just really good to be self-reflective in the work that you're engaged with in terms of other individuals. And I think when you are called out, there's always that embarrassment factor and geez, what did I say? And, the first is to be defensive about it, right? And sometimes it's just sort of taking it in, listening, taking a seat back and reflecting a little bit on what the situation might potentially be and how you might be able to rectify it. Again, I can bring it back to just a basic relationship. So if you've got a friendship and you and a friend have had a falling out, what would you do in that situation? I guess some people would dig their heels in and others would come back around as well. So, but thank you for the question.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Yolanda. And one of the other things I wanted to thank you for doing with your talk is mentioning how allied health is part of the whole picture of health and human resources in Northern Ontario. And that in conjunction with the medical arms of NOSM, that the different pathways and initiatives that you were talking about, allied health is certainly going to be an important focus of that as well. So thank you for saying that. And we did actually have a question come in, although I didn't see it at first because it came in a different box. So the question, first of all, thanked you, and then was asking, how can we as clinical educators, as most of the attendees today are clinicians and preceptors, how can we engage with Indigenous youth to encourage them to pursue careers in health sciences?
Oh, that's a good question. It's my favorite question. I think that, you know, wherever and whenever, and I get teary-eyed when I think about our youth, because, you know, oftentimes when I'm talking to youth, and I think about my time at Lakehead University when I was doing undergraduate recruitment, everybody thought I had two heads when I said we were going to start engaging kids in grade 4. Like, that's when the conversations need to begin. And you start talking to them, and you just start telling them that it's possible, that you can do this work, you know, whatever profession you're in, any Indigenous child or youth can do it. They sure can. And this is what I always tell, you know, the children in my life, and I should have actually shared at the beginning that my mother has 16 brothers and sisters. So it's funny, whenever I go to any wedding, funeral, or social where all of my family members are, everybody knows Yolanda is going to bug you about what you're doing in your life, and, you know, what education you're going to get. And I always say, you know, it doesn't matter whether you want to get out of high school and that's it, you're going to be done there, then fine, that's what it's going to be. So let's work to that goal. You want to go to college, you want to be a social worker, you want to get into a trade, you know, you want to get a certificate in something or other, that's fine, do it. And then if you want to continue on, you can go to university, and there's lots of opportunities in university. You can go to professional school. So, and it's really, you know, I often meet some of my teenage cousins and family members and community members, and they say, you know, that they don't think they can be a firefighter, or they don't think they can be a lawyer or a doctor. And I always say, you know, you've got a choice. You certainly can do it. And in this day and age, and in our society, with all of the support in terms of education and training in our community, people like me are here to support you, but also the rest of the community is here to support you. So I think that, you know, talking to those individuals and just believing in them, you know, so that they have a sense of hope, purpose, meaning, and belonging. And that's the mental wellness framework I was talking about earlier. I think that that is, you know, when people lose hope, that's when it becomes a challenge. But oftentimes, as long as that hope is there, talk to them about what that career looks like, share that experience with them, you know, what it took to get to where it is that you are at. And I always say to kids, you know, it's only, you know, you have to put in the work. This is what you have to do. You know, you have to put in the extra time. We have to give up those extracurricular activities to be engaged in things. You know, if you want to go to university, it's all about learning theory and stuff like that. So you need to do that, right? You know, when you're going to college and you're learning a trade, you definitely still have to study, and you have to, you know, compromise a little bit. So I think that just reaching out and talking to them about what the joys of that career might be as well, right? I mean, I think that that's something really important, and understanding that oftentimes, you know, one of the claims to fame that Lakehead University has here locally in Thunder Bay is that they have one of the highest rates of first-generation learners. So oftentimes when you are talking to Indigenous students, they're going to be a first-generation learner. They're not sitting around at their kitchen table talking about post-secondary education because their families haven't been there before. That was my case. Neither of my parents had been in university. I think my mom finished grade 10, you know, but at the same time, I think that that's really, really important to understand the context, where the youth might be coming from, and that we believe in them. And there's so many opportunities available to support them along their journey, including us at NOSM.
That's right. Yes, thank you so much, Yolanda. That's great. I haven't seen any other questions come in the chat, but maybe if anyone has a question, if you wanted to take yourself off mute, you could certainly do that.
Nope. Everybody's probably trying to eat lunch.
I can ask a question. Hi, Yolanda. It's Cindy Davis-Mealy. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I was just wondering if you could kind of provide some advice to maybe some of us health professionals that do complete work in Indigenous communities. I did some work before COVID, and I was flying into a First Nations community, and I was trying very hard to kind of be that engager, right, and to get to know the community members, and I found it sometimes difficult. So I was wondering, what other steps can we take to kind of get past those to barriers to connect with those that we work with in the healthcare environment, and I know I'm always very friendly and open and that sort of thing, but I found it hard to kind of engage in conversations and kind of get to know people on that personal level. So I wonder if you had any advice for those of us who are really trying so hard to build these connections.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. That's a great question, and I think it's a question that I'm often asked. And I feel like there are a lot of variables depending on the community you're going to, sort of, knowing the context of the community that you're in, understanding the history of the community, understanding perhaps, those who have come before you. So oftentimes it isn't anything personal that they don't like about you. But again, trust is a significant issue in Indigenous communities, and building that relationship takes time. And I think often when we are allied health professionals or health professionals coming into communities, unless you've been coming in there, for years or live there permanently, it's hard to establish a long-term relationship with people because they are so used to different people coming in all the time. And perhaps even, in terms of speech language pathology, I know in my community, we've had speech and language coming to our local school for many years. And I can't tell you how many different people have come in over time that are working with the same families and from generation to generation as well. So they see often the change in that, and I think that is part of the challenge, and then you could even go to things like the way in which we dress sometimes is a bit of an issue. Some people come into communities dressed very professionally, and that's not you're not mirroring the community sort of environment, if you will. You're different than them oftentimes, in some of our remote, and even in my community, which isn't a remote community, it's a drive to community. You're a guest, you're a stranger to them, so they're not really sure what your intentions are, and they're not sure what their family members think of you coming into the community as well. And then in terms of, I think about speech and language, oftentimes in communities, it is through their schools. The whole education system has not had a real great effect on Indigenous community members as well, and some of the judgments that are there in those spaces and places. So I think that, continuing to do the work is important. I think continuing to go in and perhaps even sort of putting the question out on the table about, what is it that you can do to be a better ally, friend, person doing the work that you're doing, whatever work it is that you're doing in the community, engaging them as to, what is success, because that, and we could talk a little bit about different worldviews as well. Your value or your view of success may be very different from what the community's value of success may be. I'm trying to think in your profession, pronunciation, let's just say, is one of the areas that you'd be focusing on. So if somebody's able to pronounce one word that maybe you think that they should be able to pronounce way better than they do, but they feel like that's the success, that is success. I think in terms of cultural safety, oftentimes, cultural safety is only defined by the individual who's actually subjected. So the client or the patient is the one who decides whether they feel it's culturally safe. It's not for us as an organization or a healthcare practitioner to say that you're a culturally safe practitioner. It's the person who's on the receiving end of that. So I think that there are lots of variables. I think that you continue doing the work that you're doing. Cindy, I'm not sure of your exact situation and how long you've been doing the work that you're doing. I think that Indigenous community members are really happy, jovial, funny, humorous people. So if you've got some good jokes, it's always good to share a good joke here and there. And they love belly laughing. I don't think I've gone to any community where we don't do lots of joking around and teasing and sort of those nuances and engaging in that kind of whatever you sort of see is happening in the community. I think it's good to mirror that. So again, you know, the way in which we dress, the way we present ourselves, maybe being a little more casual versus so, you know, and I'm not suggesting you're Uber or Uber, you know, but just sort of just mirroring what you're coming into, I think is really important there. And then the consistency piece is really important as well. I know that when I spoke of the palliative care project that I was involved in, I knew it was a short-term project. It was 1 year. And I was really leaning on First Nation communities and leadership and organizations to get the work done within the year. And I was really sad to not go back to those communities. So whenever I have the opportunity in my current position here, when I was at Delico for the 3 years that I was there, I always reach back just to touch base to say, hey, how's it going? And this is where the project landed, you know, and it doesn't have to be something that's, you know, every other week. It's just sort of touching back every, you know, 6 months to say, hey, still thinking about you and loved our conversation about this, that, or the other thing.
Great. Thank you so much, Yolanda. That was a great answer and great question, Cindy. Thank you. I really like, you know, a lot of what you said, gone back to the importance of educating yourself. And one of the things that I do want to mention for anyone on the webinar today who doesn't already know that the Indigenous Affairs Unit at NOSM has resources. There's resources on our Rehabilitation Sciences website that links to other organizations that are providing Indigenous cultural safety training. So there's certainly no shortage of opportunities out there to educate yourself. It's taking the time to do that. And I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today. I know that you're incredibly busy, and I know that we just kind of took you away from a few things in order to provide the chat today.
It's all good. It's all good. It's never ever going to stop, and I absolutely love it. So I just wanted to extend to everybody out there as well. Please, my phone is always available. You can call me. We can set up some time to chat. If you have any specific or particular questions to address, I'm happy to have that conversation. It's really important to engage our partners in a good and meaningful way, and for the long term as well. I think that's another really important aspect of the work that we're engaged in.
Absolutely. Thank you, Miigwech, Yolanda, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and same to everyone else. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I have already sent out the evaluation and feedback, so you should have gotten that already. So please give us some feedback on this session and ideas that you have for future sessions. And I see there's some thanks coming in for you as well, Yolanda, in the chat. So I'll leave it there, and thank you everyone again, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.